I got into counter wildlife trafficking work because I think that since my earliest years, I have had so much love for all living beings. And then I went to biology school, thanks to Jacques Cousteau and Jane Goodall and my parents, and I got in conservation genetics. And during my master's in conservation genetics, I got in touch with a few different lines of work. Wildlife forensics from the US Fish and Wildlife Service National Forensics Lab. I learned about wildlife trafficking in Brazil from the organization SOS Fauna, and I started to work with an ornithologist, Fábio Schunke. Putting all of these three lines together, I learned about counter-wildlife trafficking, I learned about wildlife trafficking, and I started to learn about fieldwork. I discovered the huge volume of animals that are withdrawn from nature to supply the illegal trade, to supply illegal consumer markets, to supply the illegal use of wildlife. And as a biologist, I knew about the deep impacts, the negative impacts this activity has in nature and how it can impact ecosystems as a whole. So all these collaboration efforts culminated with my PhD thesis, which was in population genetics of wild bird species exploited by the illegal trade in Brazil. And then I didn't stop anymore. What I like the most about my work, first and foremost, is because I get in contact with different lines of work, different people doing different work. But I really love that I feel that even though I'm making a tiny difference, I feel that I'm making a positive difference in the world. What I like the least is when I get in contact with animals suffering and people suffering and difficult social situations and how complex wildlife trafficking work is and counter wildlife trafficking work is. Because it's a problem which is social, cultural, economic, conservation, and it has so many facets, so much suffering, and it has to be dealt in all its facets. Being a woman in my field is not that difficult. I have not found so many barriers. During fieldwork, it was funny because I did fieldwork with one male colleague, and rural inland people felt very uncomfortable. They asked us if we were married or if we were brother and sister, and they said, oh, the girl is going to the forest, the girl is going to the bush, and I reached to my machete saying, I have good company, I'll be fine. We always had this tension of running into the wrong people while in the field, because if they had bad intentions, there was nothing we could do, my colleague could do for me. But in science, I feel that many of my role models, examples, professors are women. They are active, they are on the field, and I feel that it's fine. The major problem that I see in my field is concerning being a working mom, concerning maternity leave, concerning people understanding that after you have a child, your priorities and time will change. I think that we should try to get longer paternity leaves so that women are not so behind in the game when we go back. I think that fathers should be more with the child. And I think that there should be some sort of understanding concerning nursing the baby after you go back to work, and concerning I'm not going to be in the field for 40 days now that I have a 2-year-old, maybe later. But I think that institutions and bosses need to understand that your career will change and your priorities will change, and that this is good because it's the future of the humanity that we are creating. So we have to take care of them with love and care. The Wings organization is so important because even though personally I have not had to fight strong barriers by being a woman in the field, women need to have organizations like this as incentives and helping them to continue to develop their work and fighting for better situations such as same work wages, and getting to discussion the maternity issues, getting to discussions being a working mom, being a woman, and frankly, wearing the clothes that we want. We need to put these discussions on the table, and I think that the Wings helps us to do that in an organized way. But above all, Wings and the Courage Award was the best incentive when I needed the most. I was going through a very difficult professional and personal time when I received the email talking about the award. I was on a dead end, and suddenly I had energy to overcome that, and I did. And the Courage Award was a very important recognition for two reasons. First, it's a recognition of a collaboration effort for which I am a face, I am a conversion point. But I would not be here without Ken and Mary from the US Fish and Wildlife Services National Forensics Lab, without my advisor, Professor João Morganti, without my fieldwork colleague, Fábio Schunke, without Marcelo Rocha and the organization SOS Fauna, without Stephen Gauster and the organization Freeland, without Dr. Vânia Túlio and the São Paulo Public Ministry. So it's a recognition of all the efforts of all these people, and this is very important. But also it's a recognition of my previous work, my current work, and my future work. When I got in Skype to discuss the award, I told them, see, I have a child, my work has changed, I'm not so much in the field and on the ground anymore, so if you feel you want to take the prize away and give it to someone else, I'm fine. And she said to me, we want to support what you were, what you are, and what you will be as a woman, as a work that your work has to mature and evolve according to your professional life and according to your personal life. And that was so powerful, because I looked at my little girl and I looked at my laptop full of work that was behind, and I said, let's do it. So it was the most important incentive when I needed the most. I think that my greatest accomplishment professionally was to be able to be a conversion point of several efforts. So I think that I was able to put together different lines of work with different people, and together we're starting to make a difference. Personally, I am very fond of having been able to be accepted at the US Fish and Wildlife Services National Forensics Lab, first as a volunteer, then as a visiting scientist, going back every year from 2005 to 2013. And I think I was one of the first to develop research in collaboration with them. So I'm very proud of that. I think that personally, and I don't want to sound full of myself, I'm happy for trying to live a life that makes a positive difference, even if it's a small one. And I feel good to feel that I'm doing a little bit of good in an ethical, in a way that it's good and correct. And I feel that being a good example for my child, maybe she will grow up believing the same values that I do, and then step by step we're going to get to a better place to humanity. I think that many people have had very strong influence in my life, and I wouldn't dare to name one. So if you allow me, I will name a few. I don't want to sound lame, but of course my parents, especially my father, who always told me to follow my heart and follow my dreams, and have supported me even during the most difficult times. And same to my husband and child, they always supported my crazy line of work when I wanted to go to the field, when I wanted to go to police raids on the ground with SOS Fauna. But when I got in biology school, the professor asked, who here got in biology because of Dolly and all the genetic changes that there were in the years 2000? And I didn't raise my hand. I raised my hand when he asked who got in because of Jacques Cousteau. And if he asked Jane Goodall, who got in because of Jane Goodall? And that's me. So these people that are on the field, that are making a difference, that show us biodiversity and how important it is, and that we have to care for biodiversity there as entities that evolve during time and not in our houses or in zoos. They made a difference in my career choices. but also my professor, João Morganti, who always said that he would support my dreams and my research, and he said, choose your research, I'll be there with you. And he says this until today, and I'm not in his lab anymore. And Ken Goddard and Ned Espinosa and Mary Curtis from the forensics lab, after many letters saying that I just had to go to the forensics lab, they said, you know, come. And then they kept accepting me again and again and again and teaching me about wildlife forensics. So, and Marcelo Rocha from SOS Fauna, who taught me about wildlife trafficking in Brazil. And Fabio Schunke from my fieldwork, who taught me about ornithology and fieldwork. So I think that so many people have had such important influence in my life that I wouldn't dare name in one. And all the unspoken, not famous conservationists around the world that give their lives for a mission and a cause. But above all, my parents who raised me to be a person who is good and ethical and correct, and to respect and love all living beings from all species. I think that if I could say something to a teenage boy or girl who is interested in science, I would say that the real game changers are the ones who are nonconformists, are the ones who change the status quo. So you're gonna hear lots of no's, but that's good, that's great. And true scientists, they understand that we expect the paradigms to change. So we want younger people questioning our results. We want younger people questioning paradigms, questioning the status quo. This is good. If you run into an advisor or someone who says that you shouldn't do that, run away from them, because they are not the ones who are going to support your work. Keep on going, keep on questioning, keep on changing, because we're not doing such a good job with the world we're leaving to you guys. So please go ahead and change and question and be critical. I think that the only way to change huge problems such as lack of accountability and lack of empathy is to take parallel but interdependent ways. And one will not make sense without the other. So, of course, the major brick of our society and of our civilization is education. Education is what will create behavior change in medium to long term. So we have to educate people, bring information, bring awareness, and especially work with the younger children and teenagers and the next generations. So that is what will create the behavior change that we want to see in the future years. However, while we don't get there, we have to work to conserve and to conserve, for example, biodiversity until this behavior comes. So people must be held accountable for their acts. People must, okay. So while we don't achieve the change that education will bring in medium to long term, people must be held accountable. So I think we need laws that are strong and show our societies what is important, what matters. If we have laws that say that, for example, wildlife crime is a misdemeanor, that sends a message and sends the wrong message. If someone, for example, a wildlife trafficker, gets caught, no penalties, no jail time, and he keeps free to commit the same crime and get high profits, that will send the wrong message. So we need education, we need awareness, but we need strong laws. We need the state to show society what's acceptable and what's not. Otherwise, they will keep on doing that until we don't have anything left. We don't have elephants, we don't have macaws, we don't have, and the impacts to human society about this will be huge and are already happening. Concerning empathy, I think that we need to show people that other species need to be conserved, yes, for environmental services, yes, in our interest, but simply because they deserve, they have a right to their lives in their ever-changing environments to evolve over time. Why do I need to conserve a bird? Because it disperses seeds? Yes, but just because it's its right to live a fulfilled life. And I think that people should have more respect to other beings in our species and in all other species. It can be a domestic species such as a cow or a pig, but it can be a bird, it can be a snake, it can be a dung beetle. If I could tell one thing to the world in a billboard, I would need 1,000 billboards because I have so much to say. But if I could choose one sentence now, maybe a little bit lame, I would say, wild species are not pets. I think that's my main mission currently. I think wings is important for several reasons. But first and foremost, not only to incentive women in science and exploration, but as an organized, I think wings is important for several reasons, but first and foremost, to incentive women in science and exploration, but as an organization that brings these women together, that makes them talk to each other, that shows their work to the world, and that puts important issues on the table for discussion.
I'm a scientist. I study plants. I study the way plants grow. I study the way they die. I study the way they might grow in a very different world. So we put them in little boxes where we can control everything. We can control the light and the moisture and the mixture of gases that they're growing under. And then we change all those things to be like 200 years from now or 400 million years ago. And then we grow plants and we watch them. And we take videos of them and we count everything they do and we kill them. And then we grind them up and analyze them as many ways we can think about. And we're interested in how they grow, how they might have grown differently, and importantly, how they may grow differently in the future with our changing world. And that has implications for, if you think of all the different things we use plants for, it includes food. Everything you eat either started as a plant or was a plant that was fed to something else that you're eating. Medicine, a lot of our medicines still come from plant extracts. And wood, this place is a great example. If you look around your house or anywhere you go, we build mostly still with wood. And that's a plant. So how those things have changed, have lived on the earth is a big part of what the history of the earth is. And how they will live on planet Earth is a big part of what our lives will be and what our grandchildren's lives will be.
What do you like the most about your work and what do you like the least about your work?
I just enjoy being in the lab. I just like to be there. I think everybody has a place where they feel happy. And for some people, it's the library. A lot of people have told me they love to sit between the stacks and just relax in the library. People say it's the swimming pool. People say it's underneath a maple tree in their grandparents' backyard. I think everybody has that place. And for me, that place is in the laboratory with the lights all lit bright, with my tools in front of me, with things growing, with something happening or might happen or just did happen. It makes me happy. I try to think of a more technical answer for why I love it so much, but I always come back to the fact that it just makes me happy to be there and to be in that room and to have the tools and see plants growing, and that's enough of a reward for most of the days. So when people ask me what I like best about my work, I sometimes feel like I should give a technical answer or something very specific about what we do, and that's the moment when it's all worth it. But I normally have to just admit that it makes me happy. It makes me happy to be in the room where I do the work. And when people ask me what I like least about it, I think it's the same things that annoy most people in the scope of their job. It annoys me when the people I'm trying to do things with don't get along with each other for what I see as silly reasons. It annoys me when there's no money to buy the things that we need to buy to do the work that we need to do. And so instead of worrying about whether I'm doing the work correctly, I'm worrying about how am I going to pay for this. On a more personal note, I have to admit that the work is isolating. It requires a lot of time by yourself in your own head, and it can be very lonely work. I always think that that makes me value the time that I get to spend with other people more. And it's also one of the wonderful things about getting recognition for the work that I do. I am so thrilled and grateful to find out that people, other people, flesh and blood people, like the idea of me doing this and want to reward me for the times when it goes right. And that feels really, really good. When I think about what's particularly important about Wings, there are many organizations that support endeavors in life. But what's special about Wings is that it's a women's organization. And women are special, and women taking the time to acknowledge other women and reward them and acknowledge them is a beautiful thing. And doing it across disciplines. I mean, it's all the sweeter because it's not people that I've competed with in my small area for many years. It's somebody that lives a different life, that looks at, and it was happy. I'm very glad I did this work, but it was hard. And the sweetness of having somebody notice. And when you work in a male-dominated field, of having other women notice and care and tell you you're good. It's a special thing, and it's a beautiful thing when it comes your way. Well, I am trying to change the world. It sounds like a lot when you say it, but most days I feel like it's pretty doable. And my change is the following. I grew up in a small town. I grew up with my girlfriends around me all the time, from kindergarten through high school. They were my friends, and the first thing we ever thought to do was to tell each other everything. I went to college, and I started to study the sciences, and I didn't have that anymore. And the further I went in science, the fewer and fewer opportunities the further I went in science, the fewer and fewer opportunities I had to share that bond. And science requires a lot of hours living in the experiment, living in science. And so I found myself at a place where I was giving everything for this job, really getting a lot out of it. But I had to let go of so much of what I had felt, what had sustained me in my early life as the sisterhood that I took for granted. And I still don't have that in my job. And I'm from the generation that never will. There's just not enough of us. But it doesn't have to be that way. I want to change the world such that the girls you went to kindergarten with are the same girls that you're an engineer with when you're 30. And they're the same girls that you start up a tech company with when you're 40. And they're the same girls that you sit in the National Academy with and have dinner with the Nobel Prize winners when you're 50. I think that's doable, and maybe I can have something to do with it. Being a Wings Scholar and an awardee is a special thing. I think, you know, we go to these exotic places. We do this work that isn't very romantic when you're up to your elbows in, you know, the feces of some animal that you're tracking. And I think it's hard to underestimate the importance of knowing that there's somebody behind me. I'm here as a Wings Scholar. I'm here with the support of an organization that believes in me. I think day to day, when you're out there on your own and you don't fit the mold, to know that you're not alone. You know, you're there because people believe in you, and their name and their organization goes with you. It emblazons on your results, and it emblazons on the trip itself. And that turns it into an adventure, not just a trip. What is my greatest accomplishment? I recently had the great joy of publishing a book about my work and about my life. And I've received many letters from readers that found something good in it. And the sweetest ones, I think, are from people who say, I was never any good at science. I never enjoyed science. I thought it was dull, and I had to memorize these equations, and I just never liked it, but I liked your book. I liked what you said about this. And I go for a walk in the woods, and it makes me see things differently. I just can't imagine a greater achievement than to talk to somebody from the heart based on your experience and your work, and have them walk away with a different view of the world. I never imagined I would accomplish so much. And every time I hear that, I just am overwhelmed by what a wonderful thing it is. When I think about people who've had the most influence in my life, I think about my father. I lost him recently, and he was 92 years old. And when I was a very little girl, I remember him first. He taught a community college in a rural area, and he taught science. And so he taught all the sciences. And he had a teaching lab, and he had all the demonstrations and the stuff, you know, that you need to show people how magnets work and how pendulums work. And I spent a lot of time there with him, just like the kids that their parents ran the ice cream store. They all learned how to scoop ice cream. So me and my brothers were always in his laboratory. And we always wanted to take out the stuff and play with it, and we didn't know these were, we didn't think of these as school stuff. We thought of them as games. And my father never ever said, no, you can't take it out, or he was just endlessly patient in letting us do this. And it taught us how to get joy from making a machine work, or fixing a machine, or testing something and finding out the answer. And I was very small, and that's what I wanted to do. I always knew that's what I wanted because of him. And later, when I became a scientist and I ended up in environments where I was an oddball and I didn't fit the mold and all that, I never questioned that I wasn't supposed to be there, that this wasn't the right place for me, because I had that very, very early sense of home from him. when I think about playing in the laboratory with my brothers, and that's what it was to us, play, I do remember a time when it became a surreptitious activity, where it became not something I did in the outside world, where my brothers had shop class and I got stuck in home ec, where my brothers did Boy Scouts and raced cars and set off rockets and all kinds of stuff I would have been great at. But I was stuck in brownies counting the number of forks, you know, and learning how to fold an apron and stuff, which is a good thing to know how to do. But very young, I began to appreciate that this was something secret that my father was letting me do with my brothers. And for better or worse, that made it more precious to me. And I also gained skills. I knew how to fix stuff, I knew how to take care of stuff, and all those skills came back to me in college. So that is why he's an important figure, in that he did support me in that. But I don't think he did it in order to treat me the same as my brothers. I think he loved it so much. He just couldn't contain, you know, that the lab was his happy place too. And I was his daughter. Why should he not be there with all of his children? The advice that I always give is hard advice to give, and it's hard advice to hear. But I give it anyway because I think it's the best thing I have to say. I try to tell people to learn to reward yourself. That when you love what you do and something good happens and you do it right, stop and take time to feel how good that feels. Take time to think about how good you are for making that happen, how it wouldn't have happened unless you were there doing that. Take time to take that in, because that's the reward that matters. It's nice when the world rewards you for the good things you've done, and you should be grateful, and you should take time to express that gratitude. But it doesn't always happen, you know. The awards and the medals and the funding and the publicity, it may not come. But the rewards you can give yourself do come if you take the time to cultivate that. The other important thing is that those are the rewards to chase. Don't enter this game to try to get famous or to try to necessarily change the world. You know, the world is going to change how it thinks best. You can put your ideas out there, but what you can go after is that pure reward of knowing that you've done something special and good. And if you always strive for that reward, if that's what you're going for, it'll keep you on the right path. Environmental science is an interesting place to work because the problems and issues facing us are very large. The more we understand how the earth is changing and what's at risk, there's not a lot of good news to share when we study these problems, which is why they're called problems. We solve problems. I focus a lot on the fact that there's a huge army of talented environmental scientists that care about these things, that work day and night to try to make small progress and big progress on each of these things. When I think about problems that I might be able to contribute to, I think a lot about food. I think what is special about our generation. I think one thing that's special about today is that we have about 7 billion people. We've got 1 billion that go to bed hungry every night, that are living on less than 1,500 calories a day on a good day. And we've got about 1 billion of people that are struggling with serious illness associated with overconsumption. And there's a great irony there. I think making progress on that goes back to what we grow and how we share it. And we have a lot of choices in that. We also have to think about the world changing out from under us. Like in my experiments, the atmosphere is changing, the soils are changing, the water's going different places. All of these things affect. We're trying to feed more people, we're trying to feed people better, and the ground rules are changing at the same time. I'm hopeful about it because in my life I've met so many farmers, and farmers are actually very flexible about what they grow. They want to feed people and they want to do it right. So I think there's a lot of hearts in the right place. And I think we eat 3 times a day. We make choices, a lot of us eat 3 times a day. And every time you open your mouth, you're choosing what to support and what not to support with the dollar you paid. And so it seems like a very dynamic system to me. And though it's a huge, huge problem, it's the dynamic aspect of it that gives me a lot of hope. If I could make one billboard to say what I'd like everyone to know, it does have to do with food. And I'm not exactly sure what the slogan would be. But it has to do with a calculation I made recently that if we divvied up all the calories that we produce, there would be between 2,000 and 3,000 calories for everybody on the planet every day. That includes 1 billion people that are seriously malnourished. And so somehow on this billboard I'd like to put that it's not that the earth can't support us all, it's that we haven't figured out how to share. And I would need help from design people and PR people to make that into a good billboard, but that's the idea.
I'm an atmospheric physicist, and I work on climate change, and more recently I work on solar energy. I was always good in math and physics. I never got any encouragement to do anything with math and physics. I never even thought of math and physics. I was just always very good, and I loved going to the library and looking through the Apollo books and looking through the NASA books, and in my little village in Bavaria, and where I grew up. And when the time came, I had to decide what I'm gonna do, go to college and what I'm gonna study. I didn't think of math and physics. And I started informatics, actually, because informatics back then was something you could do and stay at home, be an at-home mom and work it from home. But I didn't like it. The only thing I liked was the math part. And then I just discovered math and physics and meteorology. The atmospheric physics just felt so right. And this was the time of the environmental movement back in Germany, the Green Party. And I never wanted to be a politician, but I wanted to contribute something to the world. Being a woman in my field, when I studied, I didn't feel it was a negative. I was just one of many. But the higher up I came after the PhD, it felt lonelier and lonelier. I think the feeling of loneliness was the worst, and just you couldn't be yourself. I always wondered, how can I be a woman? Can I be really myself and do the math and the physics right? Because math and physics is gender neutral, and it was very hard. I always had to go out of my field to feel my true self. WINGS is an organization that, for me as a fellow, brings women together, and we all share a common experience. And it's so wonderful to see these women all over the world sharing our commonalities. And we are really different, and the fields are really different. And we all have something in common. And I think it is because the way Wings selects us, it's also how gracious Wings is towards us. The board and what Wings brings to us makes us better people, I think. Better scientists, or better, in my case, better entrepreneurs. And it's just a great example what women can do to other women. I got the Earth Award for global dimming. And when I started out working on global dimming, and I said this before, I always felt alone in my research. The positive thing about feeling alone is I could do whatever I wanted. Nobody cared. So I could just not do what everybody else did. And that's how I discovered global dimming. And of course, once it came out, it was rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected. People didn't believe me. And only later on, when other people confirmed my results, it became this big thing. And Wings recognizes the struggle. That's what it does. It recognizes that people have to struggle to get where they want to. And I use the Wings Award to actually fight another struggle and start changing the way we think about solar energy. And I know it's the same struggle, and I already have faced all these rejections again. And the Wings Award I used the Wings Award to pay for a patent, actually, to get the patent. Global dimming is the fact that the reduction of sunlight masks part of the global warming. And by just reflecting sunlight back to space, or keeping it in the atmosphere but not reaching the surface. And when we discovered global dimming, we could answer several open questions in a climate change debate that were related to the water cycling in the atmosphere, rainfall patterns, for example. My greatest accomplishment is not giving up on global dimming. I always tried to anticipate the critique. I always tried to be better than everybody else, and tried to, and I hoped sometime people would see that this is as important as I thought from the beginning. It was hard to prove it, but I could have given up so many times. I think this was my greatest accomplishment. My greatest influence in my life is actually my grandaunt. She was a tailor in this village I grew up, and she never married, but she had her own life back in the early 20th century, and I always admired her so much, and I visited her often, and I wanted to be a tailor. And she said, "You can't be a tailor because you are a lefty. There are no machines for lefties. You have to do something else. You have to work with your brain." And she had a very funny saying. She would say, "Never mix blue and green patterns." And everything I do when I make climate, we often make maps, and it has the land and it has the ocean, and it's always green and blue. And sometimes when I see these patterns, I think of my grandaunt, and I think, never mix green and blue. I'm often asked by younger women what they should do, or I'm asked for advice. And my advice is often, don't get intimidated and try to find your own self. And it might be a girly girl, you might be a girly girl type, you might be a punk, it doesn't matter. There is a place for you, you just have to find it. And it's important to not get intimidated and just keep looking for what you really are. Climate change is a big problem, and I said the lack of empathy is the biggest obstacle we have to overcome, because I think we can't just point to the scientists and the engineers and say, you fix our problems. We actually have to come together and have It's an economic problem, it's a political problem, it's a societal problem. And it's also a lot to do with justice, social justice amongst countries, between our own country. And this all needs empathy first. We have to actually get together and start the discussion. We have to muddle through and not just point the finger and say, you engineers give us the perfect solution. Many problems we can fix, we can find a solution on an engineering side once we have the right framework, but the framework has to come from the society, which are the people, and that's why I say empathy is more important than anything else. The one message I would put on a billboard would be nice to each other. Yeah, very simply. Wings is important for me because right now I'm in a position where I try to do something new, and wings came at the right time, and I can use the contacts I'm making now with other scientists, with the wings board, and all the nice people who support wings, to fulfill my potential. It takes more than just me. It takes everybody else. It takes a village.
My name's Kristen Marhaver. I saw the ocean for the first time when I was 13, and I remember tasting how salty it was and being amazed at how much salt could be in water. And that's because I grew up in Kansas and Minnesota and never had been to the ocean before. But my father and I learned how to scuba dive for the next year. And so we spent my teenage years going on dive vacations to the Caribbean and to Hawaii. And so when it came time for me to pick a college, I decided to study biology, but I didn't really know what would happen next. I didn't know what science was or what the life of an academic was. But about, well, maybe a semester into college, I found out about a lab that was studying corals on campus. So I kind of lobbied my way in, even though that wasn't really encouraged for freshmen. And 4 years later, my advisors were saying, where are you going to grad school? You've got to keep doing this. So I kind of found my way to science through a family activity, through a father-daughter bonding experience. And then it kind of just fit with all the other things I was interested in. Discovery, being curious, being inquisitive, working with little tiny things with my hands, kind of fit all those different things. So what I do now is study how corals reproduce in the Caribbean. We study when they reproduce, how they make babies, how their babies survive, how we can help them survive better, what signals they're looking for and searching for when they arrive on a reef. And we try to understand not only how conservation on a large scale can help all of those things happen, but also how we might be able to kind of give a hand in the bottlenecks, the places where they really need the most help. So it's partly work in the water at night and diving and crazy hours and crazy places, and some of it is just lab work and pipetting over and over and over again, trying to keep these little tiny animals alive.
That's great. What do you like most about it, and what do you like least?
Ooh, the thing I like most about studying corals is they're very strange animals. They're so primitive. They are slimy, they build a calcium skeleton underneath themselves, they don't move as adults. So you have to be really creative when you try to think about what matters to them. If you have a pet, you have a dog looking at you with sad eyes, you kind of can guess what matters to them or what they want, but when you're looking at this kind of slimy, gooey, rocky animal on the bottom of the ocean, to try to figure out what it really needs to survive is a much trickier puzzle. So it's always fun and a good challenge to try to understand what makes them tick and what they need to survive. So just the creative challenge is one of my favorite things. The other thing I love is getting to go diving at night. You know, sometimes you go, I don't really want to go diving tonight. I want to go watch Netflix and eat potato chips. But as soon as you're underwater and there's sounds and colors and fluorescence and there's animals out eating that don't feed it during the day, as soon as you're there, you're always so glad that you're there. getting to dive at night is one of the big perks. I would say one of the hardest parts about it is that it sometimes is lonely. People don't necessarily know what you do. They think it's all bikinis and tropical islands and glamour and luxury, but it's hard, it's painful, it can be lonely, and it's often true that you're not really recognized for the work you're doing until you have that big paper, you have that big discovery. So the stretches between the achievements are long. And for somebody who's used to kind of the academic schedule where you've got a test today and a test next week, and somebody who's used to having kind of regular feedback and milestones to hit, it can be pretty lonely to just sort of wait years and years in between big achievements and big successes. The award from Wings and being included in this group of fellows changed how I think about my own work in a pretty powerful way. I would have never put myself under the category of explorer. I've never been to the South Pole. I've never been to the bottom of the sea in a submersible. But what it made me realize is that you can be pretty close to your house, but at a strange time of night, for a really long time, for years and years and years in a row, nights and nights in a row, and that is as much of a wacky form of exploration as traveling really far or using big equipment to get there. So it gave me a new appreciation for what I do that I never actually kind of gave myself credit for doing. I think what's interesting about Wings and what's different is that they're focused on women who do a kind of work or have a kind of arc to their career, whereas most of the organizations in marine conservation or supporting women in science tend to be focused on medicine or coral reefs or a certain habitat or a certain kind of field of study. But the Wings Fellows are chosen for the sort of ambition to explore, and that makes a really interesting group of people. You might not necessarily have any of the same language in the day-to-day work that you do, but your sort of ambition to go push boundaries is similar.
Who had the biggest influence on you in your life, do you feel?
Oh my gosh, who had the biggest influence on my life? I guess it might be sort of a predictable answer, but my parents were incredibly supportive. I wanted to take pottery classes and have math notebooks and go learn how to scuba dive, and they were so supportive of all the kinds of curiosity that I had. And I rebelled against a lot of my schools for not being weird or creative or accommodating in certain ways. And my parents could have said, get in line, do what they say, don't cause trouble. But instead my parents said, let's go find a teacher who will help do that for you, or let's go find a whole school that will help you pursue what you want to do. So to look back on that, it's pretty moving to think that my parents sort of stuck up for me that many times and not just said, get your grades and don't cause trouble. Thanks, Mom and Dad. I've been really fortunate that the people around me in science have been so supportive and respectful and caring. I've had a lot of great men help boost me in my career, say, submit that paper back, keep going, guys would fight, you've got to go fight in this situation. And that's something I think often we don't appreciate, that sometimes women's strongest advocates in science are men. Sometimes they're the people who can sort of pull you the furthest because they can see the difference in how they would act and how we would act, and they can cheer you along. And I've been really fortunate that I haven't suffered a lot of discrimination or harassment, but I know dozens of women who've had really terrible things happen to them in their labs, in the field, in professional conferences. Everything from assault to stalking to just needles and sort of cheapening of the work that they do. So I've been really fortunate that I haven't felt much of that. I think one of the tricky things is that it's still kind of a profession where you have to kind of sell yourself and network yourself into each next level, and sometimes women don't necessarily have that instinct to promote themselves level upon level. We often sort of assume that other people will recognize us and help us along. And so we don't necessarily always have the instinct to lobby for ourselves and hustle. So it can be difficult to climb the ladder, as they say, because sometimes it's hard to find out where the ladder is, or even know that it's, you know, your job to go open that door, go call that person, go network those people. So it's kind of difficult to figure out the unwritten rules, considering that it was an old boys club. It doesn't feel like that as much anymore, but there are still a lot of unwritten rules that are not obvious to anybody who's joining the club. And so now we have to talk about getting into science.
Like either advice to yourself or to other young women who are
Yeah. Well, certainly when you tell somebody you're a marine biologist, everyone goes, "Oh, that's what I wanted to be when I was growing up." And I usually say, "Well, you probably picked a better career, whether it's finance or medicine or something like that, because marine biology isn't the glamorous dolphin training, yachting, sunbathing life that everybody assumes it is all the time. There's moments that are beautiful and magical, and the adventures and the travel are amazing, but a lot of marine biology is math and writing and statistics and computer science. So the thing that I usually tell young women and young men who want to get into marine biology or any field of science is to get really good at all those other things. Get really good at statistics and writing and public speaking, and get really good at computer programming. The way that you get in isn't actually that you study marine biology. The way that you get in is that you have a talent that you can bring to that field that allows you to set yourself apart, but also allows you to discover things that other people wouldn't discover. The other thing that I tell youngsters when they want to become scientists is just to go volunteer. Volunteer at an aquarium or a science museum or in a lab, because the game is more about proving yourself and the doors starting to open, and a lot less, it matters a lot how people recommend you to their colleagues and how the personal references are passed along. So I tell kids to go prove themselves in one place, and then their supervisor in that location will help them get through the next door. What's starting to change our frame of mind and what's going to help us, I think and plan for the long term, is that finally now we're coming up with ways to incorporate the value of nature into the world of economics and the world of policy in a rigorous way. So to give you an example, it used to be that a fish in the ocean was anyone's to catch. And it wasn't until you caught that fish that it really had any monetary value. So the first person to get the fish was the one that made the money from the fish. And this led to what we call derby fisheries. You might have a season that was only 3 days long because that was the maximum number of fish you could catch in a year. And it was the tragedy of the commons, the race to the bottom to catch every single fish. Now what we have is systems that allow people to own those fish before they catch them, and they can wait till the market price is right. They can wait until the ships with the freezers are in the right place at the right time so that the fish is fresher. And all of a sudden you have an incentive to protect that fish until it's big enough and catch it at the right time. So we've finally seen nature become part of economics. And what that does is it lets governments put a money value on nature before it's ruined, before it's turned into fish meal, or before the beach is plowed for a hotel. That has been more powerful for conservation in the last 10 years than I could have predicted. I've been stunned at how quickly things are starting to change, because we're finally able to think about nature the way we think about money. We think about how interest rates affect the growth of our assets, and now we can do the same thing with trees and fish and coral reefs. I think that's going to help us a lot. If I had to put something on billboard for everyone to read, it would just say, "Be nice." I think that's my Kansas roots and my Midwestern upbringing. We're not going to do well when we all trample each other and insult each other. And if you're nice to one another, that affects how you see nature and animals and everything else around you. So it's short-sighted of us to be mean to one another, and that's the same for nature. It's the same as how we treat the world.
I'm a beekeeper, and I'm very, very interested in how bees keep themselves healthy, their natural health care. So I've been interested in bees since a very young age. I was 18 when I got interested, and ever since then I've just been fascinated with the whole bee colony, but particularly how they keep themselves healthy. The thing I like most about my work is that I get to go outside, and mostly beekeeping is done on your own or with just a very few other people. So you're quiet, you're in some beautiful locations, you open up a bee colony and it smells good, it sounds good. So that's what I like the most.
Wings women are risk takers. And it's nice to be able to acknowledge that that's a good thing to do. It's an adventurous thing to do, but it's a very rewarding thing to do. Having a Wings Award justifies things that I've been doing. So my whole life, it's been, what is she doing now? I can't believe, look what she's doing now. And this is just a justification, an acknowledgement, a reward for saying, yeah, you went out there, but look, it paid off. It's not that I strove to accomplish something. I wasn't striving to get anywhere. I just had a passion, and it was bees and beekeeping, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do at any cost. So the accomplishment is just doing what I've always wanted to do. What gets me out of bed every morning is that every day is different for me. I never know really. I have an idea of what I'll be running into that day, but with the research that we're doing, it's all exploration and asking new questions. The people that I'll be seeing, the bee colonies that I might be opening up and their situations, every day is new. I just love that. Many people had a big influence on me. Of course, my father had a great influence on me. He always pushed me to go a little bit farther than I thought I could go with school or with athletics. I had a great aunt from Russia, and she was an opera star. And I took lessons with her for a little bit, and although as a kid I was not going to be an opera star ever, I just loved her eccentricity, and there was just something about how unusual she was that inspired me and helped me think that it's okay to be yourself. And then, of course, there were beekeeper mentors that influenced me greatly in how they taught me to keep bees and how to think about bees and how to think like a bee. Being a woman in my line of work used to be very unusual. When I would say I'm a beekeeper, people would say, "Oh, you're a bookkeeper. How nice," in this condescending tone of voice. And I would say, "No, I'm a beekeeper, like bees, bees." But so it might have been unusual when I got into beekeeping to be a woman beekeeper and woman bee researcher, but not now anymore. And yeah, the beehives are heavy to lift, but you learn how to use your whole body to lift rather than just your arms. So I don't pay attention to it much. Honestly, it's always been there. I get comments all the time, "Oh, you can't do that," or "You shouldn't do that." But my response from even as a little child was, "Well, why not?" I wasn't the why kid so much as the why not kid. And show me why not, or I'll find out why not. To younger women and young girls, I would say if there's something that really kind of intrigues you, that interests you, go for it. And keep going. And even when people say, "What are you doing?" you can just say, "Well, this is interesting to me and I want to find out more about it," and just keep going. Persistence is everything. One way that people can get more in tune with nature is to go to a beekeeper and have them open up a bee colony. And when you see the inside of a bee colony, and when you smell it, and how wonderful it is, and how foreign it is to anything that we do as humans, their whole society is so unusual and so different. I think it's a real eye-opener to that there's other ways of living right here on Earth with us. If I had a billboard and I could tell the world one thing, it's do what you want, do what you love.
I was so surprised, shocked, and humbled when I heard that I'd won this award, and it actually took me like a week to really process it. And I talked to my mom and I said, you know, I've won this award. I don't know how I could have won this award. I'm not sure that they haven't made a mistake. You know, and I was like waiting for another email to come to say, actually, sorry, sent this to the wrong person. But it was so wonderful because the actual category, humanity, was something I had never really put myself in, although I understand it. Because I had this meandering career, and I do science, and I do some work with creative communities, and I do some work with tech communities, and I do. But really, what binds it all together? What holds it? What is the propelling force? And I thought, that is exactly it. And I didn't know how much I needed somebody to say that, to say that we see that all these things in all these different places, really what they are is about adding your little bit to serve and contribute towards helping humanity move from here to here. It's really, really important for women at all times, but I think even more so in this age and time, to hear from other women a validation and an understanding of what the peer group values, sees and honors, because I think there is a way of seeing that the community of women, be they scientists, be they politicians, whatever, that see in a particular way, which is very holistic. So personally for me, wings means so much more at this time in my life, because I found, you know, what we miss now in modern society are those rites of transitions, those passages of transition from an age to an age, from girlhood to maturity to your second stage of life. At every stage, you feel it in yourself. The way you're seeing the world, the way you're working shifts. And you don't know if other people are journeying with you. You don't know if things are changing, you're seeing it differently. And you need some sort of affirmation or something that takes you to say, okay, you were here and you moved here, and it's okay, because this is what life is about. It's about this journey, and we move from here to here. And for me personally, entering into what I'm calling my second stage of life, this community, this Wings community, who they are, who they embody, the kinds of work they've done, the courage, the curiosity, the bare bold-facedness of the women, just allows me to say, I have more faith in the next stage of my journey, because there's a whole community of women, look at them, that have done this, and they recognize some part of me in them. And so I can transition easily to the next stage of my life. I was telling my daughter this yesterday, and it was about the path that I took to become a scientist. So when I was in school, I was very much an all-rounder. But in those days in the UK, they had a system where you couldn't just apply to Oxford and Cambridge for your A-levels. Schools would nominate certain people, and then they tell you what subjects you could apply to Oxford and Cambridge to do. So I had wanted to do chemistry, physics, biology for my A-levels. And it was a big thing to be chosen to sit the Oxbridge exam. And I was one of the girls chosen to sit the Oxbridge exam, but I was chosen to do geography, history, and English, because they thought, oh, it's a safer bet. You know, sciences are very hard for women, and you know, then you'll be competing with all these other men. We know you're good at sciences, but really, let's just stick to, you know, arts and humanities. And so I was like, wow, this is a great honor. So I went and told my mum. And my mum said, I know it's Oxford and Cambridge, but really, I think you should study sciences. And if they don't put you in for that, that's fine. It's more important that you get the education that you need for the life that you know, will be bigger. Because she'd done arts and science. She said it's wonderful. She became a teacher and she's very happy. She said, but I think that if I had studied science, I would have had many more opportunities in life. I would have had many more career options and many more paths that I could follow. And so I think you just have to decline this Oxbridge nomination and just do 3 sciences. So I had to go back to school and tell the headmistress, who was very annoyed, that I'm sorry, you know, I can't do it, you know. My mom says I have to do 3 sciences. So I studied chemistry, physics, but what she said to me really hurt, and for many years colored how I saw myself. She says, well, you can do that, but you don't have a scientific brain, let me tell you, you have an artist brain. You are never going to get anywhere because you don't have a scientific brain. So I came home and I told my mom said, whatever kind of brain you have, you will use it to study whatever you need to study. It's not about one or the other. It's about applying the tool, which is the brain, to the task. Don't even worry about it. But there were many times when it's difficult for women in sciences, where it's predominantly male and it's very competitive. You lose confidence, and I had very little confidence actually doing my PhD and all of that, because it's just so precarious. And at many times I thought, God, maybe they were right. Maybe they saw something and I really am not this person. I shouldn't have done this. But I did it. I got my PhD by the age of 25. And I said, wow, without a scientific brain, this is what I can do. Mrs. Rayburn, who was my English teacher, funnily enough, but she said, listen, read everything. Find out everything. Don't say this is too small, or this is too low to know, or this is too highbrow. She says, everything you're curious about, go and find out about it. Just pick up a book, ask a question, go there. And so she had this idea about learning and knowledge, and that was what she instilled in us in the class, was just about whatever it is, pick it up and find out. And then, if there's any other thing you don't know, take the next step, and that's all there is in life. And I just loved her spirit, and I think she was and still is the biggest influence in my life, because now I'm working in areas that I didn't get trained for. I'm doing humanities, and people get PhDs in urbanization and in conservation and natural resource management, all of those things, and I've grown into those roles, and I'm leading teams of people who have PhDs in that. My PhD is in something else, because it is about just boldly saying, what don't I know? And how can I learn it? What I would say to my younger self and to any young woman entering into science is that try and answer the question that bothers you the most, because that's where your energy will come from to finish the journey, to complete the task. It's that itch. So if you have an itch and people say, well, you know, you may be curious about this, but this is more important, whatever, you will never have as much passion, and you will never have the energy, because it really does take a lot of energy to finish that path of inquiry, to get from beginning to end. So answer the questions that bother you the most. When I'm in Nairobi, which is where I've lived for the last 3-4 years, it's the call of nature. When I'm in Nairobi, where I've lived for the last few years, the thing that gets me out of bed is the call of nature. And that's the beauty of living in Africa, is the drama of nature, the noise of the cocks crowing, the birds singing, the sun rises, you know, it's like a curtain draws and a curtain shuts, you know, and so nature interferes, or is part of, we see it much more graphically than we see like in London and other countries, because we've urbanized so much that it doesn't interfere with our everyday life, and just doesn't give us color and meaning. So that's what gets me up in the morning. There's the call of the world having woken up and going about its business. So by the time I open my eyes, the birds are chirping, they're doing their thing, and I need to just enter into the race. The problem of waste is so deep an issue, and it cuts across every aspect of our lives now, that I think we really need to reframe and think about how we consume, what we consume, and as we are consuming, where it's going to go. It has an impact. And I think for the first time now, as this generation, we are more fully conscious that everything we take in goes somewhere else. It doesn't just disappear into thin air. It is ending up somewhere, and it's generally doing some damage. So what is it that we have brought into our lives, that we have paid to bring into our lives? And how is it that we live? And is it what's the word? Is there an embarrassment of riches that I don't even know how to put it? You know, we tend to choose 2, 3, 4, 5 things. Really, we want one. Whether it's food, whether it's how we live, you know. Out of everything, because we are able to have many more choices, and it's a wonderful thing to have many choices, but every choice has a responsibility and it has a consequence and it has an impact in terms of where it goes next. Nothing disappears into thin air. So I think we have to take it deeper, not just in terms of recycling or whatever. We have to begin to change our philosophy in terms of how we live, what our impact is on our little community and the greater world, because there is an impact. The message that I have been giving myself and trying to live by, and I'm not saying that I've reached there, but it is what's my screensaver and on my desktop, is a message from actually a thinker called Thomas Merton. And he says, our business is just to love others and not to inquire whether or not they are worthy. And that is a hard task, but it is by the loving that we render ourselves and others worthy. So we just get on with it.